Welcome, everybody. On the Do Now, I want you thinking about student safety and how big of a priority is that in school? Is that the most important thing for students, or is something that's more important than that? We are going to be focusing on rights in schools as our sort of last assignment for our test starts tomorrow and Friday. Um, Again, our goal is to try and figure out when is it okay to limit a right or a freedom? When is it okay to take some of those rights away? So when we're looking at schools, well, what sort of rights and freedoms are allowed to be taken away while students are in school? All right, so we need to recognize that most students are not 18 in school. There's a few who are, but even those who are 18, you are not treated as an adult when you are in the school building as a student. You do not get the same legal rights and freedoms that you might expect an adult to get out in public. This has been ruled on by the Supreme Court because schools, the phrase they use is in loco parentis, which is Latin for in the place of the parents. So while students are in school, the school takes the place of the parent, meaning they take responsibility for the student, which is a lot of responsibility for their safety, for their upbringing, for their education. Right, that's a big responsibility for potentially hundreds or thousands of students in your building. Um, And just like at home, you don't have, rights and freedoms the same way as you would in public. In schools, you don't have the same rights and freedoms you might have in public. Or when you get older and become an adult, you don't have those same rights. Easiest one we can do, real simple, Second Amendment, the right to own a weapon. You don't have the right to have a weapon in school as a student or as an adult. Right? So in schools, lots of rights and freedoms are limited, sometimes very severely, sometimes moderately. Um, but there are limits to your freedoms when you're in school. Also, courts are very forgiving of schools, right? A police officer violating an adult's rights and freedoms is much bigger of a problem than a school limiting a student's rights or freedoms, right? The courts are a little bit okay with that. They recognize that this is a place of learning. Safety needs to be number one, learning number two, and rights and freedoms are pretty far down the list when it comes to priorities. So when schools take away rights or freedoms in the name of safety and education, most of the time the courts are okay with that. All right? Children need protection. They need to be protected in lots of different ways. And therefore, rights and freedoms need to be limited while in school. You don't want disruptions to their learning. So I want you thinking about these different potential actions. Are schools allowed to do any of these things? Are schools allowed to tell kids what they can and cannot wear? You might already know the answer to this. Um, yes, they can, but they have to have a reason, right? So they can argue some clothing is a distraction for school, or it's violent, or it has illegal drugs on it, or it's related to gang activity, right? There's a lot of excuses that way they might say someone can't wear something, but they can't tell you to take off like your Trump shirt or a Biden shirt, right? They can't force you to stop wearing something because of its political message. They can only tell you to change if it is causing disruption to learning or if it's something illegal, right? Advocating something illegal. Can schools tell kids what they can and cannot write in a school newspaper? They're supposed to have freedom of the press, right? Kids do not have freedom of the press when it comes to a school newspaper. The school owns the newspaper. The school can restrict what is put into that newspaper. What about search lockers? Can they just go through opening lockers? They can. They own the lockers. We don't have lockers here, but if we did, you and your parents or guardians would sign a release beginning of the year saying that we have the right to search your lockers, that it's not a place of privacy. The court has ruled that students have no expectation of privacy when using a school locker. They are allowed to open and search your locker without your knowledge. Can they randomly search students' backpacks? And completely random, just come into a room and say, everyone open your backpack, I'm going through your stuff. This one they have probably the least amount of freedom to do, the least amount of ability to restrict this. Generally, they're going to need to have a good reason. They can just like start opening random bags. Um, Now they can have something at the front of the building, like a search, where they go through metal detectors and stuff. But randomly going through people's bags is a little bit over the line. They need to have a reason to suspect you specifically before opening your backpack. But then again, a lot of courts have ruled that this is okay when you're in school. Again, there's no expectation of privacy, and that safety is more important. Keep getting updates. Um, so a lot of schools are confronted with this issue of what's more important, freedom or safety. All right, today we're going to be looking at social media, cyberbullying, and is that causing enough of a distraction um, that's making education impossible and leading to students being at risk and not feeling safe at school? All right, should schools be allowed to punish students for what they say online? That's essentially our big question for today. And it's going to be one of the big questions on your test tomorrow. All right, so I want you thinking about this cartoon. What do you think the author is trying to say about a teacher's talking, saying, I don't teach my students about the Bill of Rights anymore? It makes them unruly. What's this author trying to say about schools, students, free speech? And pause this video. I interpret this as to say this is going to be criticism of schools, meaning that they are restricting free speech because it's uncomfortable for teachers, and that teachers don't like having to deal with students who are unruly and out of control, thinking they have rights and freedoms. We'd rather them just be quiet and sit there. All right, so this is going to be something critical of schools and their restriction of freedom of speech. This graph shows how schools react to things like hate speech. How often are they actually getting involved when a student uses hate speech, does some form of bullying, cyberbullying, racist comments? Do schools actually act on that? Well, if it's a racist comment, it's almost 60% of the time it will have a reaction from the school. But when it's something like anti-immigrant, anti-Muslim, kind of like 30, 35% time. So schools don't always react when these things are being said that could lead to an unsafe or uncomfortable environment for a student. Today, you're going to look at different documents and analysis. You're going to try and understand what's the argument being made. How does it help you answer the question, should schools be allowed to limit students' online speech? Today we're going to be analyzing. Tomorrow you're going to be writing a response to this, a level 4 response, using the evidence you found today.